They were the most depressing group of people Yossarian had ever been with. They were always in such high spirits.
Welcome to AMI Audiobook Review, the weekly podcast where we chat all things audiobooks, starting with the quote of the day. We'll get to it in a second. I'm Ramya Amudan with Jacob Shymansky, and our technical producer for the show is Nasreen Abdelmajid. Okay, Jacob, quote of the day, which I really like. The first thing I thought of was toxic positivity, but that may not be at all where it was going. Where did you get it?
This is from Catch-22 by Joseph Heller. This is actually super representative of like the sense of humor in that book. Very cynical and absurd. But it's kind of like when you're in a bad mood, but everyone around you is just having a blast, and you're just like, why isn't everybody else miserable like me? It like makes you mad that everybody else is happy.
Yeah, exactly. Oh my gosh. And then the thing is, like, with the happy part, that's what I was thinking. Like, people who just are happy all the time. I'm like, how? This is not real. This is toxic.
I see how you got to that conclusion.
Yeah.
It's like, why is everybody else happy? Like, you shouldn't be happy.
Yeah. Get your selfies, smiling selfies off Instagram, okay? You're just lying to all of us. But yeah, that's... I haven't read this book, by the way. Isn't this mandatory reading for a lot of people when you're in middle school-ish?
It wasn't for me. I just read it because I was interested in it. But this is one of those first books that I read as an audiobook when I was getting into audiobooks like 5 or 6 years ago.
Yeah.
So back then I wasn't as good of a listener. So I remember how this book left me feeling, but I think a ton of it just went over my head because it was too dense. Like, I was too dumb to understand it. And I feel like this one merits a reread because I just remember laughing out loud at this one.
All right. Maybe we can read it and review it. Yeah.
That could be fun.
It's one of these books, I swear everyone's read it, and I'm thinking, I don't know if I just missed school that week or what happened, but I didn't. But then again, I read The Great Gatsby, and I can't remember squat that happens in that book. I just remember not liking it. So
sometimes you read audiobooks and you don't retain anything.
Nothing.
You know what? That actually kind of has something to do with what we want to talk about for a minute here.
Oh, okay, good. Not speeding up your book. All right, cool. Yeah. We're going to talk about, at least in the first half of the episode, listening versus reading. Because this is a big, big argument everywhere, all over the net, all over anybody who reads or listens to audiobooks. I think that people have a lot to say on this stuff. So if the question is, did you really read a book if you listen to the audiobook version? That's what we're going to talk about. You found a lot on this, okay, like articles and forums and all kinds of Reddit threads, so we'll get into it. But in the second half, we're going to talk to Ammer Khan, our audiobook curator, who joins us once a month. He's got some specially curated titles and recommendations just for us. How sweet of him to put that together.
Okay, this whole conversation about whether listening to an audiobook is reading. You know, like if I listened to a book, am I allowed to say that I read it? On everything that
are you allowed to say, I read this book, but really you're talking about having listened to the audiobook?
Some people, and quite a few of them, strongly feel that you're not allowed to say that. Now,
it's so mean. It's so mean, by the way. I've read through these notes and I'm just like, wow, ouch.
And and so I got an article and a Reddit thread and a New York Times article. And I'm not cherry picking these. Like, these are very easy to find, and I see a lot of people that are echoing these opinions, right? And I think it breaks down to one of two things. When you say you're not allowed to say that you read a book when you listen to it, I think people get bogged up in the semantics. Okay, it's not technically reading. You can't say you read it.
Yeah.
And then
that's the biggest argument.
And then some people say, like, they can't believe that you properly comprehended and took in a book the way it was meant to. Like, you literally did not consume the book if you listened to it.
That part I might be leaning towards that opinion.
Interesting. Okay, even as someone who exclusively listens to audiobooks?
Yes.
Fascinating.
Yes, I think that there is a cognitive difference, but I guess we'll find out with the studies and research and numbers.
Okay, here's a Reddit post I came across that had 6.9 thousand comments on it, which if you're familiar with Reddit, that's ridiculous. Okay, and there's so many posts like these. Okay, here we go. Far too often, people will brag about how they read 200 to 300 books a year, but they actually just listen to audiobooks for the most part.
Boo.
They then get offended when you get confronted by the fact that listening to an audiobook is not reading. It's listening to somebody reading a book to you. It's not reading it yourself. Reading requires an active involvement on your part. Listening is something passive that can be done while doing other things.
Whoa.
It's like arguing that a toddler that gets read a book by his mother did indeed read it, which is absurd.
Okay.
Right?
Relax.
I know.
Whoever
Okay.
wrote this.
Like, there's
okay,
some-
calm down.
There's a lot of emotion in here. And by the way, I cleaned
Yeah.
up a ton of
Why are you
typos.
so mad? Yes. Pull out the grammar. Clearly this person... Okay, listen. I think that, yeah, as you said, someone seems to be very frustrated by this argument to begin with. And I don't think that listening has to be passive. It for sure can be.
Absolutely.
That's
Yeah,
why
totally
we
agree.
started this conversation with, I don't remember what Catch-22 is about. But... yeah, it does not have to be passive. Are you kidding me? And with the amount of audio content that is out nowadays, like we're talking audiobooks, podcasts, audio dramas, radio in general, like every kind of thing out there that you can just consume as fully audio experiences. Are you telling me that these people just take in nothing
Literally
throughout
nothing?
these experiences?
Maybe a little
Come
bit.
on.
But like, okay. Let's be real though. People often listen to audiobooks and podcasts passively just for noise.
Like, okay, no.
Right? That's a
they
fact.
listen.
You know that for a
not just
fact,
for
you.
noise. Come on, Jacob. Whose side are you on? They listen while doing other things. I will agree with that. Like all of us, right? Even people who listen exclusively to audiobooks, we're doing other things as we're listening. I'm rarely ever just sitting and listening to an audiobook. However, you're active listening still. I don't think we're just, throwing away hours of the day for just white noise.
That's
on an
fair.
audiobook that
I
way.
don't think people want to be wasting their time. Nobody wants to be wasting their time, right?
No.
But I think when you're doing things while listening to an audiobook, your dishes, your laundry, whatever it may be, cooking, you can switch between active and passive. And if
Yes.
you've listened to a good portion of your book up to the point that you're at any given time passively, you're going to, it doesn't matter if you listen to it actively. You're going to have missed some crucial stuff that's going to make it harder to comprehend. So you need to listen actively constantly to be able to properly
Yes.
comprehend it, which is speaking for
Which is
myself.
practicing active listening skills.
Yeah, which is great. You want to be practicing your active listening skills.
Exactly. So for those people who are not doing that, or for those people who are accusing everybody of only passive listening to audiobooks, I think the question really is, are you listening to audiobooks properly?
Yeah, and I'd say, if you're listening to audiobooks passively, you're doing it wrong. And I don't think, specifically for audiobooks, I don't think people are doing that because that's just stupid. For podcasts, I get it. Sometimes.
Yeah. Oh, there's so many podcasts that are just legit white noise.
Ouch.
3 hours of banter.
Not this one, though.
Obviously not. No. Practice your active listening skills while listening to this podcast. What else did you find?
There was an article that got shared a bunch on social media, probably because it has a pretty spicy title. You're dumb and wrong. Listening to audiobooks is not reading.
Oh my
Okay.
God.
Some audiobooks have great narration, like how my mom read Hulse to me when my bedholes was still 8 p.m. This meant her narration limited my ability to interpret the information my own way. Your emotions are based not just on the text that you're reading when it's in an audiobook. The voice of the narrator is set, and the emotions of the scene are strictly set. However, the audiobook narrator says them. If you think that's not a big deal, you need to give yourself more credit for independent thought. I disagree. I disagree with this really hard. The narrator doesn't strictly set the emotion of a scene. I think this is somewhere where we might differ, Ramya, but if a narrator gives a bad performance and misinterprets the emotion of a scene, based on the words behind the performance, you can still tell what the author meant to do. It's not like the narrator is completely ruining a book if it's misinterpreting.
Yeah, and you and I had a discussion about this. I guess we'll call it a
Why was
discussion.
discussion in italics there?
Yeah, well, it was kind of an argument. After our guest episode on Access Tech Live, right? We really got into this because basically, I think that there is a high amount of influence by the narrator, and you tend to disagree on that as a whole, right? But I think that whether or not the person's good or bad, whether their performance is excellent or not, is only part of the question. The other part is just that, yes, when someone is talking to you, when someone is reading something to you, I think that there is a decent amount of percentage that we're placing on the performance, the presentation of it, rather than having taken it in with vision or with Braille. I'll say that Braille is closer to just like reading in your head.
Yes.
Right? So that's why I think that there are parts of this article or whatever opinion piece that I kind of am like, yeah, I can see that. It says, like, one of the lines is, interpreting an originally written work by reading it, you think more on the story and its themes. And yeah, you would say no, and I say probably. I think there's more time or version of reflection versus like somebody storytelling to you. I don't know. I can't back it up, but that's how I feel.
I find it difficult to pick a side on this, to be fair, because I've never really been a good print reader. Back when I used to have sight, I was such a slow reader, and it was never enjoyable.
Right.
But I just feel like I don't miss anything when I'm listening to an audiobook.
We got to get someone on the show who reads Braille and audiobooks interchangeably, or, both.
Right. Well, I already know that they're going to say Braille is better for comprehension.
Yeah, but I want to know why.
I
agree with them.
Right?
I want the details, yeah. Okay,
I just feel like
one more.
This leaves us in a strange place as blind people who don't read Braille particularly well. Because I feel like we're missing out on the quote-unquote best way to read. Right?
Yeah, it's true. And that's why
crappy.
access has to be a part of the conversation, which both of these opinion pieces, by the way, these haters who've written, who we've read from so far, none of them have taken that approach or, leave caveat for people with access needs who can only take in audiobooks.
Yeah, well, Reddit isn't really known for its nuance, but in
whatever, Reddit needs to do better.
In a lot of the articles that I came across, they do often put that caveat, but obviously it's understandable for people with medical reasons.
Yeah.
And then
in the footnotes.
Yeah, I also come across other articles that they'll say they're just different, as if they're equal, but then you could tell in the way they write that reading print is much better and superior from an intellectual standpoint. And that's another part of it, is that I think there's some gatekeeping happening here, where there's an association with reading print books is the thing smart people do while they wear their glasses and scratch their chins, whereas the dumb people are just listening to audiobooks with their mouths agape.
Yeah. And there has been some research done into this kind of comparison, right? There's a New York Times article that you found. We won't have time to get into it, but the question is, are audiobooks as good for you as reading? And there's a study or studies that point to different conclusions on comprehension and whether it's different between traditional books or audiobook listening. And one of the ones is from 2010 University of Virginia study. Had one group follow a lesson in text format while another followed the same lesson in podcast format. And the podcast group performed significantly worse, they say. 28% worse.
Yeah, that's the difference between an A and a D grade. That's pretty considerable. There was another study that had one group read a piece of text in print, another group in audio, and another one in both at the same time. And there was no discernible difference in comprehension between the three books. So generally,
so then you start to wonder, what is it that they're testing for, and how do you even measure that?
How do you even test that? But I think one of the most interesting findings that I found when I was looking for studies like this is there were studies that were done that investigated the eye movements of people reading print, and using really sophisticated eye tracking technology, they determined that 10 to 15% of eye movements when reading print are regressive, meaning that they're looking at previous words that they've already gone by. So it's not strictly temporal, right? It goes back in time and then forward. So it kind of tells you that when you're listening to an audiobook, you don't get to go back on a whim, right? Or at least when you do, it's very clunky. You have to go 15 seconds back. But when you're reading print, you can go back very, very quickly. And if 10 to 15% is a lot, that's a lot.
It's a lot. It's a lot. And the other thing is, you probably realize quicker when you're reading visually that you've skipped or you're not paying attention anymore or you're fatigued, right? Or distracted versus an audiobook. I swear sometimes I'm 10 minutes, 15 minutes have gone by and I'm like, what has been going on? Who? Huh? Right? Like where it takes a longer amount of time to even understand that you're out.
It's a different,
like you're just passive listening.
It's a different skill. You can become a far better listener. And I have heard it argued that when you're listening to an audiobook and you go through those experiences that you just described, like, or you just zone out and then boom, like 15 minutes went by and you didn't understand anything, you realize that like you can more accurately realize when you're not listening.
Absolutely.
And that means that you become a better active listener. And then like I've taken the habit of when I'm not listening, like you pause it and do something else. Just be like,
exactly same. Just take a break. Because like it's true, right? And especially people who are listening to audio all day for one reason or another, you get fatigued. And it's more about realizing that you are distracted, that you're not active listening anymore.
And ear fatigue is something that when you go to like audio engineering school, they tell you about all the time. It's real and it's very affecting. Once you realize how bad it is, like you can't forget about it, and it applies to listening to audiobooks as well. And it's a physical thing. Your ears get tired of listening, but your brain also finds it harder to interpret everything.
Absolutely.
But take a break, and another part of that skill is just being able to do it for longer. Your mental stamina for listening to audio.
Yes, you got to work on that. Exactly.
And I guess that's a benefit of speeding up your books too, because you're not listening to it for as long. Therefore, you get less tired. It's literally easier.
But can you take in the information? Because that's another thing. Like, is the pacing of information what the ideal pacing for your brain to comprehend? Because there's that as well, where I've taken in an entire book at like 1.5 speed, let's say, just to get through it, but it only lasts short term in my memory. And then I can't remember what the heck the book is about.
Well, you only have yourself to blame.
Get out of here. Okay. We're speaking of taking a break. Let's take a break from this convo. We'll be right back. Ammer Khan, our audiobook curator, is going to be with us. Welcome back. It's AMI Audiobook Review, the weekly podcast where we chat all things audiobooks. I'm Ramya Amudan. Jacob Szymanski is also here, and we're gonna get to know audiobook curator Ammer Khan as he comes on in just a few seconds. But before we bring him on, why not go to the Sela homepage? We love our friends at Sela. They join us once a month as well, but every week we like to give you a preview of what they got going on the site. That is celalibrary.ca. They've got 3 feature titles, and the ones up there right now are The Fury by Alex Michael Odds. This is a suspense and thrillers title. There's also Unbroken by Angela Starrett, and this is an Indigenous peoples in Canada, Canadian biography. And we also have the last feature title up there, The Bee Sting by Paul Murray. Serious and literary fiction. Check them out, celalibrary.ca, and it's easy as pie getting signed up if you aren't already with them, and they've got a huge catalog of audiobooks, ebooks, and daisy format.
Shout out Sela. Honestly, they're such a godsend, especially when you consider how expensive audiobooks are. You know, for us people that qualify for it, when people have disabilities or print disabilities, let's go. Coming in clutch.
All the time. Okay, as we said, once a month, audiobook curator Ammer Khan joins us. He reviews books. He recommends books. What doesn't he do? Not much, honestly. When it comes to audiobooks, he is just all in there. Ammer, where do you want to go today? Are we reviewing more than anything?
We're reviewing and recommending.
Okay.
I was talking to Jacob earlier, and the books that I wanted to feature today are more universal appeal They're less sort of niche books of where, some people might not like them, some people might like them. It's more general appeal. As I think most of the listeners know by now, I tend to read more books with strong female leads, and I think that's the general trend in terms of authors and books for now in terms of current books. I'll start with sort of the more serious one, which is the Queen of Paris. It is a historical autobiography, well, not autobiography, but a historical fiction of Coco Chanel, the very famous Chanel brand, and her life and times from when she grew up to all her sort of life and times. The book is by Pamela Bennings-Ewan. It's very well researched, very well thought through. There were several things that sort of came to light more recently in terms of her life, Coco Chanel's life, and basically that lent itself to bolstering the story that she tells in this fantastic book. It's narrated on Sela. If you're interested in fashion, perfumery, there's a bit of that in here, but it's a lot about choices and how you really have to fight for what you want. For those that don't know Chanel, she lived through the First and Second World War. She was actually a famous celebrity during the Second World War. So she was in Paris for 4 years of Nazi-occupied France and Paris, and that's described as well.
So what is Coco Chanel known for nowadays? I'm completely ignorant to this topic. Like, should I be embarrassed for not knowing her?
Fragrance?
Yeah. So Chanel is she started off with something called the House of Chanel when she first started. In those days, that's basically gave you the chops to be a fashion designer. So she actually started in what they call haute couture or haute couture. I'm not sure the pronunciation, but she basically started off with designing women's fashion. And she is most famous for Chanel No. 5, which is her perfume, which is a central part of this particular book. If I had to guess, it's probably the most popular and most sold fragrance in the world, even to this day. So she was an absolute icon of her day. She was actual no nonsense. She was a businesswoman, but Chanel is a brand that is recognized worldwide even today.
Right. And that's why I'm curious, though, why the fictionalized? Because this is technically a historical fiction, and you did say it's a fictionalized version of her story.
Yes.
Is there a reason why this would be a big hit over just picking up a biography?
It's a first-person narrative, so you're actually living her life through her eyes. So that's sort of the fiction part. I mean, we never know exactly what's going through people's minds unless, you're writing an autobiography or something like that. So that's the sort of fictionalized part. There are parts in the book which I'm sure are fictionalized in terms of events and things, but for the most part, the broad strokes of historical fiction is accurate in terms of how the Germans, or the Nazis came into Paris, how the city was abandoned, what the mood and feeling of people were in general. There's the story of how she lived her life before she became a fashion designer, how she became a fashion designer. All of those particular pieces. Yeah, the other thing that she is famous for, which is sort of parallels to something that occurred more recently in my life, is the little black dress. So she was actually very she's attributed to popularizing that, but the reason why I say it sort of occurred more recently in my life is because I actually went to the Metropolitan Museum of Art recently, and they have an exhibit called Women Dressing Women, and it's sort of a collage of women designers throughout the times that they've put up as an exhibit. And one of them happens to be Coco Chanel, but there was also a designer just before her who actually created the little black dress. So it's a little point of fact and a little point of interest for me.
So what is it specifically about this book that makes you want to recommend it? The writing, her story stands up on her own? Like, what would you say?
Both. It's very well written. It's very interesting. The pacing is good. It touches on a lot of serious topics without diving into them. I mean, when you're looking at something like the Second World War, there's so many different sort of things that you could get into in terms of, collaborators, especially the French resistance, especially in that particular geography, right? Anti-Semitism, There's all sorts of things that are mixed in with that particular time period. To say nothing of, growing up in the time period that she did, and she did come. She is a rags to riches story. So she really clawed her way to where she is, but by today's standards, that may or may not be sort of acceptable, and I use that in quotation marks. But she was driven, and that's it's an interesting look into that time period in general, and how people live their lives, whether you're rich, whether you're poor. And it's phenomenally written. I mean, like it's not difficult to read at all. There's no sort of things that you need to understand beforehand. It's a very pick up and go kind of book.
You mentioned the women dressing women, and that makes me think like there was probably a lot of that, right? Just not the norm, I guess, for women to be entrepreneurial, and the kind of challenges and climbing up the ladder situations that people have to face on such drastic levels, I guess, especially to get where she was, which is huge.
Exactly. And the other part of it is trying to hang on to that as well, right?
Sure.
How easy it would be for somebody to just come in and, take it away from her or whatever, and constantly being on that edge. And, especially for people who have gone from being poor to being rich, they are a lot more sort of aware of things that can happen to take things away from them. And you get a real sense of that with this book, where, she's sort of looking 360 degrees all the time, and when things start to happen, she's like, she knows what she wants to do and wants to execute it, and is ordering people around even though they're not understanding what's going on.
Oof, yeah. Did you get a lot of the fashion industry side of things? Like, obviously that part is there inertly because of who she is, but did you get a lot of what was going on in that space during that time?
No,
I would hope so.
There's not a whole lot about the fashion industry itself. It's sort of it is her story, and there is the part about how she became famous, and some things about dressing, and going from designing hats to dresses to being a perfumer, and what's involved in that.
Right.
But it's not a deep dive into the fashion industry and fashion icons, and it's not that type of book.
Okay.
For the listeners, what's the title again?
The Queen of Paris.
I
believe it's The Queen of Paris. I think it has a longer title, The Queen of Paris, Coco Chanel's story or something like that.
Fictionalized story.
Yeah, that's it. So,
all right, we got more to go through. What's next?
we certainly do.
Yeah.
Read a lot this month.
We're impatient.
we're gonna go into another historical fiction. I'll end with a more quirky title, but
Okay.
This particular one is called the Giver of Stars. By Jojo Moyes. This is a book that's really, really interesting. I believe narrated by Julia Whalen, if I recall.
I'm immediately interested.
Yeah, if it's not narrated by her, it's very much her type of book. And it's another one. We were talking about naming last week, Jacob. And I still don't understand why this this title is titled the way it is. The book is about a time in the U.S. history in the 1930s, where Eleanor Roosevelt put this proposal together, and it was actually executed to create pack horse libraries. And what these were designed to do was basically women would bring library books to other women in places and locations which were not accessible by car, so only accessible by horse. And this went on for, I think, the better part of 10 years. So this is a fictionalized story of a group of women in Kentucky who were providing the service, and all the sort of challenges and things they had to go through. So the book starts with basically a British woman who decides to marry an American, come across the ocean. And of course, she's thinking New York and glamour and all this, and she ends up in Kentucky. Not just Kentucky, but rural Kentucky. And it's not a story where she just runs away and doesn't like it. She actually takes to a lot of the raw beauty of the place, and really wants to make it work. But there's so many challenges that are running around, and typical sort of challenges for that time in terms of when are you going to have kids, and then these other pieces, and this initiative comes along, and there's all sorts of resistance to people reading in general, let alone women reading, and all the sort of challenges that go along with that. To say nothing of the fact of actually going out into the wilderness to give books to these people.
So this is a historical fiction, so it makes me wonder, to what extent does the author lean into the historical fiction aspect of this? Like, is it very, very much about the historical fiction, or is it more about the story being told here?
I think it's both. I mean, the basis for the story is super interesting in terms of, there was a pack horse library in general, which blows me away in general, of having people on horseback, delivering and taking back library books.
Right.
But, it's a very well integrated story where it's talking about that particular piece, but it's also talking about the fictionalized story of each of the women that make up that library, and their strengths, their character, all the things that they have to deal with individually. There's also, a sub theme of race that comes in there as well. There's definitely class that comes in there. It has a lot of the same sort of themes as something like To Kill a Mockingbird, and where the crawdads sing. It has that sort of vibe to the book.
I think when you say that, people know exactly what you mean without necessarily having to describe it if they read both books, because I felt the same way about Where the Crawdads Sing and To Kill a Mockingbird as a parallel. But
yeah, I mean, it has some of the same elements to there. There's a little bit of a courtroom drama that goes in there as well. But I find it's a shorter book. I think The Crawdads Sing and To Kill a Mockingbird feel like longer books than they are.
Well, their journeys over a longer period of time. Years worth.
Right, and I think there's a lot that happens in those books too over that time period. This book feels a bit shorter, not by much, but I find it a little bit more readable, and the pacing is a bit quicker, which is nice.
Now
it's concise. Right?
Yeah.
It's a compact book, but there's a lot in it. Yeah.
Okay. Is there a storyline per se?
Yes.
Like, you've talked about a lot of the themes and such, but I'm curious about, are we following some characters in particular ways?
Right. So the storyline follows this particular British woman and her journey of basically, signing up for this library and all the things that happen in between while she's at this library, or being part of this library. So there is a theme. I don't want to give too much away in terms of storyline, but her the family she married into owns a mine, and they are very wealthy, but they're also sort of accused of not being safe. There's a love story there too, in multiple ways. So there's a lot to unpack in the book, and it's very enjoyable to read, which is why I'm recommending it. There's a lot to like about this book. And there's a little bit of everything in the book.
I'm curious for you, Ammer, do you pick up books like this? Do you intentionally go looking for books like this, or when you come across them, do you find that you usually come across books like this? I'm not sure if Where the Crawdads Sing was a bit of an anomaly, but for me, it came up right after finishing To Kill a Mockingbird, and I started to think, like, are there people writing in this particular way?
Well,
That kind of like isolated person coming into society, still kind of being isolated, having to be accepted, that kind of thing.
I think sometimes we feel like books are following us, right? Like,
Fair.
hey, how did this happen? Well, for me, I think this book I came across because I was looking at just all the titles that Julia Whelan has narrated, and sort of just picking titles at random, and then taking a look at their synopsis and be like, all right, let's give this one a shot.
Right.
So I think that's where I came across this book in particular. Queen of Paris was actually a recommendation from a family relative, and that was something I picked up. But it's interesting because it's not the only autobiography or biography of Coco Chanel, as you can imagine. There are several. This one is from 2020, which I described earlier. So the writing is also very much, modern. I mean, it's not something where you're picking up something from the 1930s and being like, okay, what's going on here?
Yeah, sometimes they can be a bit dated. I'd like to back up a little bit to,
Sure.
you talked about how this is like a story with this like an isolated character introducing themselves into a new community. I think we talked about in a previous episode about how like escapism is more popular than ever, and these books that have an isolated character introducing themselves to a new community lend themselves beautifully to putting yourself in a character's shoes and like being like basically pretending that you are the main character. Not everybody does that, but I feel that's become very popular, and those kinds of books lend themselves very well to escapism.
Yeah, and this book in particular really takes you away too, because it's not a landscape that most of us are living in. I mean, you're in the Appalachian Mountains in Kentucky, on horseback.
Yeah, completely different.
In this, one street sort of town. I mean, like, not all of us live in a place like that.
That's a cool
right?
setting. Honestly, I'm interested just for this thing.
By the way, that title was The Giver of Stars.
Next, I picked up this book more for just fun because we were talking about strange titles, and I had come across this vampire book called The Bite Before Christmas. And I thought I'd...
Pardon me?
Oh, God.
It
You
makes
came
me...
across this in February? Can we just pause for a second?
I thought it was funny, and when I took a look at the Sela title, it wasn't human narrated, so I was like,
How did you go
"Aw."
deep diving into finding this in February?
Anyways, I ended up with another book with a very close title. It's called Twas, and that is part of the title. Twas The Bite Before Christmas.
Ugh.
And I still don't know why the title is titled that way, except for the fact
Wow.
that the timeline seems to be before Christmas.
Zombie,
it's
right? Apocalyptic? What is this?
No.
Not at
no,
all?
actually,
I thought it
it's,
was just like the whole zombie thing becoming so popular. As soon as you put in a title
has
that sounds like
nothing
it
to
could
do
be a
with
zombie thing.
No
people
zombies, no vampires. It is actually a lawyer murder mystery.
Oh, God.
What?
All right.
Yes.
I'm trying not to roll my eyes. Carry on.
Andy, it's an Andy Carpenter mystery, which I didn't know is a very popular mystery series. This is from 2023. There's 29 books in the series. This one is number 28 from last year. It's a different book for me because it's a very male character. But it's written in a first-person narrative with a very sarcastic, stereotypical, jokey, and funny way, where it makes it really easy to read. I mean, like the book is only 6 hours long, and I think that's probably true for a lot of the other books. Glancing at the titles again from our discussion from last week, I couldn't help notice that most of them have to do with dogs. And given I think I've read about half the book by now, this author is definitely a dog lover. Like there's just too many coincidences. There's titles like Dog Tags, Unleashed, Collar, Playing Dead. Like there's just, and it didn't start out that way. So that was another thing I found interesting. Like the first couple of titles really sound like murder mystery titles, very serious ones, and then it just sort of morphs into all this dog related stuff, and I'm like,
You think at some point the authors just start trolling? Because they're like, yeah, we got a fan base. We're like
Yeah.
20 books in.
You're coming up to like a 29th book in the series. Like,
Yeah.
who cares what you name it?
Okay,
Like, I feel like at
right.
that point, you already have an audience. You could
Yeah,
name
you
it
do.
book 29 and they'd buy it.
Now,
I feel
now
like-
it's just about personality, It's like social media
Yeah.
presence.
I mean, like
Good Boy
Rami,
is the name of
you've
the
read
book.
Stephen King's book about writing, and I think there's
On
other
writing.
yeah, and there's other authors that truly say that they don't know what they're writing until they start writing it. These
Right.
characters are literally coming to life as they tell the story, and I have a feeling this is probably similar to what happened in this series. He probably started out with sort of a serious murder mystery thing, and then he likes dogs, so he put a couple of dogs in the books, and then people were like, "Oh, these dogs are great," or whatever, and then he just sort of leaned
You
into
got
it.
good feedback on the
Right.
dogs. Yeah.
Yeah, and then that's sort of what happened, and that happens in a lot of series, not just about dogs, but in terms of side characters and things like that too. Where
As
fans
well
are
as like
"Yeah."
homages to real life, right? You hear
Yeah.
a lot of narrators talk about, inspired by my aunt, whoever, and for voices. And it's the same thing, I guess, with characters and different themes where you're like, I'm just going to slap this in.
Yeah. So this book is pretty standard. I mean, it's not super stand out, except for the fact that it does a great job of skating that line of being non-serious with serious topics. And the premise of it is sort of a standard murder mystery where you have a criminal lawyer who's doling out eggnog at some charity event, and the cops come and arrest his friend for murder, and they don't know why he's being accused of murder, and it looks like a really good frame up. And then he's got to sort of do the investigation to figure out why his friend is being framed for something. And yeah, if you follow the clues and things, I mean, like I said, I'm halfway through, and it's good pacing, it's fun. It's nothing earth-shattering by any means, but it's very entertaining because, like, every chapter he's like, oh yeah, and I took my dogs for a walk, and they didn't give me any answers, but things like that.
Yeah.
And even the friend that gets arrested, every time he goes to see him in jail, his friend is like, how are my dogs doing? And like, oh, these guys really like their dogs.
He must have gotten a note from his publishers or editors saying, like, the audience wants more dogs. You need as many references. More dogs.
I mean, when, oh man, it's so funny. Like, I'm just going to go to TikTok. When you put up a TikTok video based on the comments, what people want from you, right? Like, what the next video is going to be, because it's instant feedback. And I'm thinking with authors, yeah, there's a bit of a workaround, but if you have a fan base, you're going to start catering. Especially with these long series, like 30 books in, 40 books in. Like, these authors are just cranking it out, and might as well
catering
start.
Or pandering?
Whatever, who cares?
Well, yeah, I mean...
That's what I'm saying. 50 books in.
I think to be
like,
fair as well,
doing
you
it
have
for
to
the
look
fans.
at the overall length of time that it's been publishing as well. Right, because some authors, like Nora Roberts, can churn out several books a year, but I mean, some authors do like once a year, and they've been writing for 50, right? And those characters keep going to some degree. But I mean, with this Andy Carpenter series, I am curious to go back to the first one and see how different it is. I think I made this comment before too. For a lot of great series which I really enjoy, the first book is really not representative. I mean, you go back and read the first book, and you're like, yeah, this is.
Did you go back and read the first book again?
Yeah, no, not for this particular series,
okay.
but I mean, for something like the Eve Dallas series, I wouldn't recommend the first one being the best at all. Even some of the sort of tonal notes and pieces, it almost doesn't feel like an Eve Dallas book because, again, it was the first one, and then get more refined as you go on.
Do you formally ever recommend to people, like, Eve Dallas is one of your favorites, you bring it up all the time,
Yep.
and do you ever formally recommend to people start with book 4 because first 3?
Sometimes, and again, going back to the recommendation sort of discussion, you want to tailor it, right? So there's other books where like Karen Rose, I think her name is. She writes really great action books, but they're not really in a series per se, but they're all over the place in terms of how graphic each one is. So it's like, which one do you recommend for that particular audience, right? For the other series, which I really, really enjoy, the Stephanie Plum series, definitely I don't recommend the first one to people. Depending on how funny, they will prefer a book, I would, choose, one of the other ones for sure.
And what's the name of that book for the listeners?
You forgot?
There's several too. I think book 11 for the Stephanie Plum series. It's a totally off the wall particular one.
Okay.
Book 11 for Stephanie Plum. And then I just casually threw out book 4 for Eve Dallas, but I have no idea. I didn't read the series. Don't listen to me.
For Eve Dallas, you can pretty much pick up any except the first book.
Okay.
There's some which would skew better than others, but the general template is the same. I mean, there are side characters that grow along with Eve Dallas, along with her relationships. So that's always fascinating for me to see, like, what can they possibly do more with these relationships? But she's a fantastic author.
Start at the beginning of the formula. And then 'Twas the Bite Before Christmas, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. How could I forget?
How could you forget? That's what I
Twas
said.
the Bite. The author's name escapes me. Rothschild, I think.
Okay.
Rothman, something like that.
And it's not Zombie Apocalypse.
No, it's not a zombie, but it's one of those misnomer titles. And I'll end with not a book per se, but another really long-standing series, the Jack Reacher series by Lee Child, which I have reviewed before. If you're into the action genre, it is definitely for you. The reason why I bring it up now is because although I knew there was an Amazon Prime a series about it, I was really hesitating to watch it because I really didn't know what to expect. I heard from people that it was really good, but I mean, especially for those who haven't read the book and say it's really good, you're like, well, I don't know.
Believe them.
Don't believe them, and it's a different experience, right? So, but I did
Yeah.
get through season 1, and I could not put it down. They did a fantastic job, and I don't know if that's because Lee Child is part of the executive producing, one of the executive producers,
Okay.
that the people who adapted it just made great choices. I mean, when you're watching something that is adapted from a book, you're sort of looking out for certain things, and when they sort of stray from the book, it can be either bad or good. And at least from my personal opinion, I think they did a great choice. I mean, they changed a couple of things, but it's really hard to do a lot of in the head type of stuff on screen, and I think they did a great job of keeping the essence of the books and the writing and the characters really well done.
Well, that's just it. It's very difficult to maintain that essence when you're trying to adapt a pre-existing IP.
Right.
Like, what you want to do is, because you're obviously going to need to make changes, what you want to do is to make sure you keep the essence of what made it great and popular in the first place, and tactfully remove the things that weren't so great. Like, I don't know if there's a point of view that isn't very interesting, or like a subplot that just didn't really lead anywhere. Like, you need to cut that, because otherwise it's just going to become fluff a TV show.
Yeah.
There have been countless horrible adaptations of TV shows and movies because it's really hard to do.
And you really want to tell the story, the essence of the story as well, right?
Mm-hmm,
I mean, and that's what I think bugs a lot of people with terrible adaptations, right? I mean, the Jack Ryan series is a perfect example on Amazon Prime. I mean, Jack Ryan was a huge presence in the Tom Clancy books, right? I mean, there's like 15 books of him, from the Hunt for the Red October, Patriot Games, Clear and Present Danger, whatever you want to call it, and they made this adaptation which has nothing to do with any of the books, and you're just like, what's going on with
Why?
this?
Yeah.
And it's not
Who's
even
that
good.
for?
And it's not even good. It's like, why am I watching this? This is awful.
And it's toughest for the people who've read the books, right? Because
my
most
God.
people are
Yeah.
loyal, absolutely loyal to the
Yeah.
core of the books. And you might be a super fan and just excited about an adaptation, but at the end of the day, you will nitpick and most likely critique the heck out of it. So, going along with what you were saying is for feedback or suggestions for adaptations, Jacob, I also think you got to strike that balance of knowing that people are coming in having read the book, and like vast majority of people, and then will have that challenge of like, what did this piece leave out? Because I know that it's not the same product at all. It's a screen adaptation, first of all, so there's just so much more that's being fed to you rather than your imagination of a visual, but then there's just like the question of what's being left out, what's being put in, how much creative license was taken on this,
And how are you portraying things that are very difficult to portray?
right? Yeah.
Like Amr mentioned, like very in your head stuff and ideas that are never spoken out loud. Because when you're making a movie, you have to show, not tell, and a book is all tell.
Yeah.
And that's why it's difficult.
Speaking of tell, it's like thoughts, right? Internal monologue. It takes up such a percentage of a book, especially if it's like first person written, right? And then you have none of that for screen, or most likely have none of that. And then, if you're like, I miss hearing what Harry Potter has to say, is that being brought? Is that being brought forth on screen?
Yeah,
Probably not.
I mean, one of my favorite spy novels, Red Sparrow series. I mean, the author was very critically assessed for this. From my perspective, if an author wants to be creative, go for it. It's a spy novel to the core, but every chapter starts with a recipe. So people are like,
What?
why? What is going on here? So, and they made movies out of this. I haven't seen the movies.
Were the recipes in the movies?
They weren't well received, and if you read the book, you can. It's very much an espionage book. I mean, like, I don't know how you would make a good movie out of this stuff. That's just me being critical. But at the same time, I'm reading this book going, how would you make a movie out of this? There's just so much thought process into, espionage and thinking about things, and maybe this will happen and maybe that will happen. How would you translate that to screen?
Yeah.
But to your
It'd be
point,
more like a documentary.
yeah. And to your point, Jacob, I don't know if the recipes made it into the movie or not, but could you imagine watching a movie and be like, okay, this is the recipe for this?
It'd
And
be
then
way more confusing.
we'll get
Special
back to the
guest
spy
Gordon
novels.
Ramsay.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, they could just totally
Yeah, I'll go
created
the
that
opposite
whole
way.
thing.
This is James Bond baking a cake, like.
Ew. I would not eat a cake that was baked by.
You were satisfied with this one, with the Lee Child.
Yes, I've watched season 1. I can't wait for season 2. I was absolutely hooked. Usually, if a series is good, I'll want to savor it and keep it aside. But I couldn't stop watching it. It was really well done. The first season is based on the first book, called Killing Floor. The second season I don't think is in order. That's fine. I mean, again, it's an adaptation. They can pick up the storyline wherever they like.
And I don't know if you mentioned this already. It is audio described on Prime?
It is audio described on Prime quite well, actually, by WGBH, I believe.
Okay, great.
So
I was going to say, or else we got to cancel this whole conversation.
no, that was my first hesitation. I'm like, is this thing going to be audio described?
Yeah.
Yes, it is. Oh, okay, let's do this.
Accessibility first, please.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, great. Yeah, this is nice. And I guess the only other real recent experience I've had about this kind of theme is All the Light We Cannot See, which we've already talked about to nauseam.
And was that a good adaptation, would you say?
I'd say so. They made it a short 4-part series, right? Based on the book.
Good.
And
Good. At least it didn't make 4 seasons out of it.
No. It was pretty well to the book. And they kind of even worked with the timelines cleanly. Like a quarter of the book is a quarter of the series kind of thing. Like they kept to the timeline. The only kind of issue that a lot of people had, including myself, was the tone. There was such a drastic difference in tone between the book and the characters in the book portraying their situations versus the Netflix series. And it was kind of like, what? This is so different, like vastly different. But I guess that kept it interesting also. I'm not even sure if this is criticism, because it kept it interesting for me, because I'm thinking, oh, all the same stuff is happening, but it feels very different, almost like there were two different characters.
How? Was it darker, more gloomy?
Yes, exactly. The Netflix series was much darker, much gloomier, much more terrifying and terrorizing compared to just the way that things kind of patiently, slowly took place through the book.
I think tolerance is one of those things about adaptations that you have to take into consideration as well, right? There's some things I've seen on like Netflix or on screen where I had a great experience with it, but I have no interest in picking up the book and getting more of it, right? I mean, The Maid is a perfect example. The Maid was a very difficult but fantastic show to watch on Netflix, but do I really want to crack open a book and experience that again? No.
No, the melancholy and such was quite well portrayed on screen.
Exactly. And something so like with Margaret Atwood books that we've looked at before too. I mean, now we have a screen adaptation. I'm like, I read the book and went through the heart wrench already. I don't want to go through that again on screen.
Margaret Atwood books, especially like all the dystopian stuff she writes, I find make for excellent TV. And like everybody who's done anything with what are the two? Handmaid's Tale and there's one more. Can't think of it right now. Both shows were so cleanly produced. Like they did such a great job. And it's one of these things where you can get excited about how to make this book work for TV. And they did that. Like you can really tell.
And some books definitely lend themselves better to being adapted.
Yeah.
Fantasy is like almost impossible to adapt. People have tried and it's not been good.
Why? Why is that?
They tried. Well, because you have to portray a bunch of magic and things that cost a ton of money to produce on screen. Lots of CGI, lots of characters, crazy costumes that can end up looking really cringe. It's just like
it's a lot of theater that's required, right?
Yeah, exactly. People complain about the costumes in fantasy TV shows all the time. They're just like, it's not dirty enough. Why is it so clean? You look like you're cosplaying. They're really, really picky.
Yeah, I mean, one of my favorite authors, Matthew Riley, who writes action books, famously said once, I love writing, and they ask me why. Like I can do stuff at a big scale without costing anything. I can sink an aircraft. I can sink an aircraft carrier that's like $2 billion and it doesn't cost me anything.
Very true. Just with my words, right?
Just with my words.
Yeah.
But I don't think we can talk about adaptation to TV without talking about a Canadian classic. Have you seen Anne with an E?
Oh gosh, yeah. So good.
No, I haven't.
So good.
So I haven't seen it yet, but it has been talked about so much that it makes me want to pick up the Anne of Green Gables again, even though I wasn't able to get through it the first time. So
Oh. Well, there's a lot of these I couldn't get through at first times that you've, in the past year, picked up and got through. So maybe Anne is your next one. Challenge for Ammer. All right, well, Ammer will be back next month. He is our audiobook curator, coming in here with recommendations and reviews and all kinds of fun audiobook chat. Do you know what we have going on next week, Jacob?
Next week, Ted Cooper is coming on to be our victim for the rapid fire review. We haven't done that in like a month.
Wow.
I honestly can't wait. Honestly can't wait.
That's a long time. All right, I'm looking forward to it too. I don't think I've ever talked books with Ted Cooper, so it's going to be fun having him on the show. We also, of course, are always down for your feedback, so send it to us. You can call us 1-866-509-4545. You can also email us feedback@ami.ca. And that's a wrap. So catch us next week for more audiobook chat, and until then, happy audiobook listening.